Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Plotlines. I'm your host, Connor. And before we get to today's episode, I'd just like to ask if you like what we're doing here at Plotlines and want us to keep doing it because we can't do it without your support. Please like, share, and subscribe. And if you're interested in joining our community, please join our Discord. And that's where you'll be able to interact with me, sort of, you know, over message or in chat rooms. Please, please consider. And today's episode is with Joseph Pearce. We are going to discuss the Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe by C.S. Lewis. I hope you all enjoy. Thank you for being back, Joseph Pearce.
My pleasure. It's good to be back.
So, like I said, we're here to talk about the Chronicles of Narnia. We had just left off, after the magician's nephew, and in Narnia, a lot of time has passed since from the magician's nephew to the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, and since it is his C.S. Lewis's first written novel of the Narnia series, do you think C.S. Lewis had a plan in mind when he wrote this, thinking about the future, or was this, was he very focused in the sort of the now?
Well, I think The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe was not necessarily written as a standalone book, but I don't think he had the other 6 books planned out when he wrote it. And I think that The Magician's Nephew, which was obviously written after The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, was not an afterthought, but I think it was tying up loose ends. So, for instance, Tolkien, Lewis's great friend J.R.R. Tolkien, sort of rolled his eyes at the fact that there were anomalies such as a Victorian lamppost in the middle of Narnia. How did it get there? Well, that's one of the things, of course, in The Magician's Nephew, which he explains. So I think that Magician's Nephew is the creation myth for Narnia. So having set the story in Narnia, subsequently he wants to go back to the very beginning, to the beginning of Narnia, to its creation. That's what The Magician's Nephew does. It's a bit like the Ainu Lindale in the Silmarillion, where Tolkien writes that creation myth as a means of explaining Middle Earth.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, the Earth is going through World War II. So a bunch of years have passed in Earth time since The Magician's Nephew, and then we have World War II, and then time has also passed in Narnia, centuries or so. Why do you think, or sort of why would Aslan let Narnia fall to the White Witch as it goes from sort of this protected place in some ways, with the lamppost and the fruit as well, and leading into sort of this dark age, and not in the dark age way that many historians think the medieval age as, but a true dark age, sort of a pagan age.
Right, yeah, where it's always winter and never Christmas.
And never Christmas.
So yeah, it's not just a dark age; it's a very cold age. So that the key thing there, of course, is we can only understand Narnia if we understand Christianity. That Aslan is the Christian God, the Son of the Father, as made manifest in the world of Narnia. So Lewis talks about something. He says that Narnia is not an allegory in any formal sense. So it's not a crude allegory. There aren't any personified abstractions and such like in it. But it's a supposal, and that word "supposal," as far as I'm aware, as a literary trope, is something which Lewis invented. And the idea of a supposal is, let's suppose there are other worlds. And once we've supposed there are other worlds, such as Narnia, how would God, so not other gods, right? How would God react or respond to creatures in these other worlds? So if, for instance, we have a world where animals are rational beings made in God's image as human beings are in our world, how might God appear to them? And of course, if you have a world of rational, loving, speaking animals, then it's feasible to suppose that the Son of God, the incarnate aspect of the deity, might manifest himself as the king of the beasts. In other words, as a lion. But the key thing is that the theology is the same, because the theos is the same. All right, and it's the same God, and therefore the same understanding of God. So the key thing is that Aslan is love, and love necessitates freedom, because to love is to freely choose to lay down our lives for the beloved. You can't freely choose unless you have freedom of choice. So once free will is made manifest in the cosmos in order to make love possible, then of course it also makes possible the refusal to love, and therefore the entry into the cosmos of evil, of the absence of good, the absence of love, pride, putting ourselves first instead of laying down our life for the beloved, a refusal to love. So that's why the White Witch, who has free will, and other characters who have free will, manifest that free will either virtuously or viciously. And so in consequence, evil is part of the permissive will of God in Narnia, as it is part of his permissive will in our own world.
Yeah, we basically just dealt with why did bad things happen in our world. I thought it'd be interesting to go through that just in the mindset of the Narnia series. But yeah, you brought up.
But point is, the two are inseparable. They're inextricably, connected. They're indissolubly married, right? It's the same God. It made manifest in different ways, but it's the same God in both the supposed world of Narnia as in the real world in which we find ourselves. Therefore, if we can't, we need to understand one in light of the other.
Yeah, it makes me think of the line. You were brought here to learn to to learn about me, so you may learn about me in your own world. Is that something like that?
The end of the Voyage of the Dawn Treader, if I remember correctly. Yes.
Yeah. So you brought up sort of talking beasts, and also there's a lot of other mythical creatures such as dwarves and such. Why do you think Lewis? Why do you think Lewis uses talking beasts and other mythical creatures as his sort of basic population in this world?
Well, I think there's various ways of approaching that question and therefore answering it. First of all, when Lewis was a small boy, he invented his own world and wrote stories for it, and drew pictures of it. That world was called Boxen, and that world had talking animals. So in other words, that this idea had been part of, should we say, Lewis's psyche since he was a child. And Lewis, like all healthy men, remained childlike, and so he carried these ideas with him. And then as a grown-up, he could obviously reinvent Boxen as Narnia, a much more grown-up world, even if it's written for children. So that's the first thing. Secondly, I think that that as with his great friend Tolkien, they understood that also we can't create anything out of nothing. Only God does that. Primal creation is making things ex nihilo, from nothing. What we do in Tolkien's language is we subcreate. We make things from other things that already exist. So as regards to telling of stories, there is a cauldron of story that's always bubbling and boiling, which, thousands of years now of storytelling coming together with storytellers exciting and inspiring each other to go off on their own tangents. But they're not creating anything out of nothing. So anything we create is going to contain ingredients from the cauldron of story. So of course that Lewis's work is going to include things such as beasts and talking beasts. He's not the first person to have talking beasts. And of course, mythological creatures from other stories, or the word myth, of course, merely meaning stories. So obviously mythological, mythic animals, mythic creatures are merely creatures that have already been told in stories. So he's reintroducing these parts of our common tradition.
Yeah. So other authors can feel okay about their feeling of lack of sort of being able to create anything ex nihilo because it's impossible.
It's impossible. I sometimes say jokingly, the only original thing that we've ever managed to do as human beings, the only thing original is original sin, our primal rebellion. But that was, of course, a turning away from reality, not a creating it. So yes, of course, we should be. What I say about writing generally, and writing poetry perhaps in particular, but it applies to prose as well, is that we should be comfortable. We only write as well as we read. So we should be comfortable, first of all, if our own writing, it sounds like the people that we're reading. It's inevitable. In fact, it's part of the learning curve of becoming a writer, is to, at the beginning, sound like a poor parody or a poor pastiche of the authors or poets that have been most influential on you. And then what you do by this practice, you find your own voice. And even then, the ingredients of the other writers that have inspired you will be present, but they won't be present in such a way that you sound as if you're trying to sound like them. It will just be quite clearly that you are influenced by them, that you have a turn of phrase or a way of seeing things or use of paradox, which is something which is you've inherited from those that have inspired you. So of course, Lewis isn't exactly that same position, that he is inspired by those people he has himself read.
Word from our affiliate, Bishop Sheen Rosaries. You've probably worn through the chain of your cheap plastic rosary. Other rosaries simply can't stand up to the wear and tear of everyday life. Bishop Sheen rosaries are made of solid metal beads and paracord to withstand any condition, and are backed with a lifetime warranty. Upgrade your rosary to a Bishop Sheen rosary made to fit your lifestyle, or buy one for a friend. Each rosary sold supplies 2 weeks of food for a school kid in Uganda. You use the exclusive link down below to help support our efforts here at Plotlines. The link will take you to sheenrosaries.com. Be sure to use the code Plotlines10.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's a beautiful way of putting how how to look at authors, and how authors can look at themselves too when they're creating something. But also, okay, but so Lucy leads us into the world of Narnia. Do you think that was purposeful, especially given her name?
Yes, I mean, what came first, the name or the character? But certainly, that Lucy, of course, derives from the Latin word lux, or lux, if you prefer, which means light. Saint Lucy is the patron saint of the blind. So if we have trouble seeing, then we can pray to St. Lucy and hope for her intercession. So yes, Lucy is the one who sees more clearly, the one who also, if you like, brings things to light. And we see this right at the beginning with her being the first to enter Narnia through the wardrobe.
Do you think that honesty that Lucy has also is a characteristic that was sort of brought into the story like that, or
Well,
reference?
I think that the honesty is a fruit of her innocence, and I don't mean innocence in the way that the world understands innocence, which is naivete, right? That for the sort of jaded, secular, materialistic world, you have to lose your innocence by gaining experience, and then you become wise. In actual fact, that those sorts of experiences normally end up in preventing us becoming wise, because we become embittered and twisted by the fact that we've hurt ourselves and others by making foolish choices. So the word innocent in the Christian sense, in which we can say Lucy is innocent, is the same way that we can talk about the innocence of Father Brown or the innocence of G.K. Chesterton or the innocence of C.S. Lewis. It's the either the lack of guilt or the desire to lack guilt. In other words, the desire to be not guilty, the desire to be clean, to be pure, to be chaste, to be open to the truth, open to goodness, open to beauty. That's what innocence is. And of course, if you're innocent in that sense, as Lucy is, honesty will be something that comes natural to you, right? To tell a lie, to be dishonest would actually be a violation of the innocence. It would actually be the destruction of the innocence. So it's Lucy's innocence which makes her honest.
Yeah, that makes sense. And then Edmund is sort of the contrast, is he comes into the world, second, and it's sort of he's what the world would consider wise, don't you think?
Yeah. Well, yeah, worldly wisdom, which is of course foolishness, as the foolishness of Christ is wisdom. This is the first shall be last, the last shall be first, etc., etc. Edmund is the Adam figure in some sense, right? That he is the one, or more to the point, rather than the Adam figure, he's the Judas Iscariot figure. Because it's his betrayal that leads to, of course, the sacrificing of Aslan. But he's a traitor. He betrays his own family. I sometimes think, and this is speculative, that the name Edmund and the name Lucy is fairly self-evident. The name Peter is fairly self-evident. But the name Edmund, I sometimes wonder whether it has a connection to the character in King Lear. Because the Edmund in King Lear is the illegitimate brother who resents Edgar, his brother, who resents his father, who therefore betrays both father and brother to the wicked powers of the time. And so, there's certainly a parallel there. Whether that's a coincidence or otherwise, I don't know. It's certainly speculative. I can't prove that. Lucy, to me, is obviously intentional, but whether Edmund is intentional in that sense is a moot point.
Yeah, it's definitely not Saint Edmund, the king. I would that'd be odd.
It's not St. Edmund the Martyr. It's St. Edmund, King of Martyr. Nor is it St. Edmund Campion.
No.
So yes, no, it's not. It's certainly not. It's certainly not a holy Edmund, but you actually see in the later Narnia stories that in being the traitor, and then unlike Judas Iscariot, becoming a penitent, he does actually, as a repentant sinner, attain a humility that enables him to see more clearly. So this, for instance, in Prince Caspian, the second person to see Aslan is Edmund after Lucy, because now his humility says, well, I can't see him, but I trust Lucy. Right? I've betrayed her in the past. I didn't believe her in the past. I'm not going to do that again now because I know where that last time. So I'm going to have faith that Lucy saw Aslan, even if I can't see him myself. And it's that faith in Lucy, and indirectly, obviously, also in Aslan, that actually opens his eyes, so he is able to see Aslan. So the point is that you can be the Blessed Virgin figure, the Immaculate, or you can be the Mary Magdalene figure, the one who's lived a miserable life of sin, but then on your knees as a penitent can actually become one of the holiest of saints. And I think that Edmund, in the subsequent books, becomes that. Due to the mortification he feels for the treachery he performs in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe.
Yeah, even in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, he still, I would say, experiences a lot of that, a lot of sort of the suffering, or him giving of himself to sort of make up for his mistakes, such as fighting in the battle and getting wounded in the Battle of Baruna.
Yeah, and at some point, of course, he's absolved of his sin by Aslan, and he makes a fresh start. He's cleansed. right? I mean, one of the beauties of the Christian faith is that we can be forgiven for our sins and we can be made as white as snow with a good, honest confession and the power of the priest acting in persona Christi. We can be absolved of our sins and be as we leave the confessional as white as snow, and however long that may last.
Yep. Did Lewis come to believe in sort of confession as being sort of the same as the Catholic confession, even though he never made it to Catholicism itself?
Yeah, we have to be careful because, of course, he did absolutely consciously decide to remain an Anglican and consciously decide not to become a Catholic.
Sure.
So we have to be careful. But he went to auricular confession. Now, that is extremely unusual for Anglicans. Even in Lewis's day, I'm guessing under 1% of Anglicans went to auricular confession. It was a very papist, very Catholic thing for an Anglican to be doing. He also believed in purgatory, which again is a very non-Anglican theological position. And my favorite, as regards indications of Lewis's at least crypto-Catholicism, is in his book Letters to Malcolm, which is almost the last book he wrote before he died. He said that after the Blessed Sacrament, your neighbor is the most important thing to you. Now, you think about that. That is a direct allusion to the great commandment of Christ, to love the Lord thy God, to love thy neighbor. In other words, that your neighbor is the second most important thing to the Blessed Sacrament. Now, this is definitely equating the Eucharist with the real presence of Christ. So, whether he did transubstantiation, or whether he believed in consubstantiation and these sort of theological questions about what happens at the consecration in Mass, the fact is that he believes that in the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And again, another very unusual position for an Anglican to hold. So Lewis's theological positioning of himself is eccentric.
Yeah, I can't call to mind necessarily exactly what it's put like, but Peter Kreeft has a book where that he discuss, or he sort of takes the persona, or tries to put himself as Billy Graham, C.S. Lewis, and J.R.R. Tolkien talking about the Eucharist, and I don't know why I don't truly remember what he believed, but it definitely, or the way he was showed to believe, but it seemed at least sort of somewhere in between, but vague.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't read that work by Peter Kreeft. I do know of it. Obviously, I haven't read it, and I admire Peter Kreeft greatly. But I do wonder. I'd be surprised if he didn't know it, but I do wonder whether he knew that quote from Letters to Malcolm about where he calls the Eucharist the Blessed Sacrament and says that it is basically more important than the love of neighbor, which basically equates the love of God, the Blessed Sacrament as God. So without reading the book, I can't comment further on what you've said. Peter Kreeft is normally very reliable. He knows his C.S. Lewis and his J.R.R. Tolkien very well. But the only confusion I would imagine is the difference between transubstantiation and consubstantiation, because he must believe in the real presence. Because why would he say that?
Yeah, I think it was. Again, I haven't read it recently, and that might be clouding my own memory. But it definitely was something in between. Like, otherwise, I think the book wouldn't really work. I think the book was meant to have 3 or 4. There was another guy that was just sort of a generic, sort of, not a real person necessarily that he was drawing upon, but just another debate, another view on the Eucharist. So there's sort of 4 different views of the Eucharist, and I think that Peter Kreeft has him somewhere in between Tolkien and Billy Graham. But that's not that, since I can't remember exactly, and you haven't read the book, I think it's best to get back to Narnia.
But he's safer to walk out of that minefield now, right?
Yeah. So, We talked about Edmund and Lucy. Can we? I think Peter, sort of the name seems to be obvious in his leadership capacity, but given his not being a papist, he wouldn't have as strong beliefs in sort of the authority of Peter, or would he?
Well, I think that he would certainly have belief in the authority of Peter, as in the individual Saint
Okay.
Peter, irrespective of whether he has the same belief in the authority of the papacy, as being the see of Peter, would be the thing to be discussed here. But the point is that Peter is the first of the Pevensey children, as Saint Peter was the first of the apostles. He has the place of honor. He's the king. So I don't think there's any real doubt that the choice of the name Peter, he is the first of those in authority under Aslan. All right. So whether we're going to play safe and just say it refers only to the historical Saint Peter the Apostle, or whether we're going to say it applies to the successors of Saint Peter, as in the papacy. Either way, that certainly in the former sense, there's no doubt at all that Lewis, as a Bible-believing Christian, would know that Saint Peter was the first of the apostles, and therefore the one with the seat of authority under Christ.
Yeah, it makes sense. Sort of either way, it sort of does definitely point to Peter, or to Peter being the apostle, sort of like the apostle in authority. It seems that he also retains a lot of sort of maybe rashness of St. Peter, or sort of the somewhat unreliableness throughout the story, because Peter is sometimes a difficult character, especially with Edmund in the beginning.
Yeah, well, obviously he has an impatience towards his younger brother. And I have a younger brother, and it's very difficult to disentangle what comes first, the irritation or the irritant. In other words, am I irritated with my younger brother because he's irritating, or am I basically the cause of the irritation in him? I'm the irritant because of my lack of patience or whatever. So it's perhaps it's one of those circular arguments we can't come to grips with. But Lewis had an older brother, so he certainly understands the brother to brother dynamic, and I think that's quite realistically portrayed in The Lion, the Witch and the Wardrobe. Is that, yes, Peter doesn't appear to have all of the issues that Edmund has, but he does appear to lack patience with Edmund, and perhaps one of the reasons that Edmund is resentful of Peter is because of Peter's lack of patience with Edmund. That's part of the dynamic of brothers, and I think that Lewis, as someone who was himself a younger brother, would have understood that.
I definitely understand. I don't have a younger brother, but I do have an older brother, so it definitely is very on the nose. But yeah, so his leadership, or sort of Peter grows over time to sort of really take on the sort of the authority. He moves on, he grows to take on the authority, such as earning his spurs, fighting the wolf, and then he has earned his place sort of as Aslan's lieutenant, so to speak.
Yeah, and I think that's important because, of course, even in the early parts of the story, he has authority insofar as he's the eldest.
Mm-hmm.
But the point is that in itself, it's not something which you merit, right? I mean, that's an accident of birth, literally.
Mhm.
So, the only way that you can actually earn the right to that authority is through acts of virtue, right? Including acts of courage. So certainly, once they enter Narnia, he does win his spurs, not just in the literal sense, but in the figurative sense. So just being the eldest, it has no merit. No noblesse oblige, right? If you are the eldest, there are responsibilities that come with that you have to fulfill, and if you don't do so, then you're actually reneging on the position that you have.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting, sort of how Peter handles that. And, he definitely does retain sort of that, need to not renege on his authority as the eldest, because he is worried about his younger brother and his betrayal, and still wants him back.
Absolutely, and again, in terms of political philosophy, of course, and the thing about Narnia, we fail to treat it with the adulthood which it deserves at our own peril. It's not merely a children's book in some, should we say, patronizing understanding of that word. There's a great deal going on in there, and so Peter's authority as the eldest, in some sense, before they enter Narnia, before they meet Aslan, is a relativistic thing, right? He just happens to be the eldest, accident of birth, he's the biggest, the strongest, but does he have any authentic, objectively authorized place of preeminence beyond the fact he happened by pure accident to be born first? Well, no, he doesn't. But once he embraces and accepts his role as the High King, which is not just accepting the position, but accepting the sacrifice that the position entails, including the possible sacrifice of his own life in great acts of courage. Then once he does that, and this is crucial, his position is bestowed upon him by God, by Aslan, he then is the authentic, objective, not relative, authentic, objective political authority under Aslan, under God. So there's some profound Christian political philosophy going on in the book.
Yeah. Does Susan sort of seem like she's kind of left to the side in the story? Do you think she sort of doesn't have as much of a purpose?
I think that's actually very perceptive, Connor, and I think it's largely true. I think that, and again, this is speculative, but that I think that what Lewis is trying to produce a beautiful work of art. One thing you do is symmetry, harmony, balance. Two brothers, two sisters. All right, that has balance. Two brothers and one sister. The one sister would be sort of the odd one out. She would be sort of by herself out on a limb. So in choosing to have, well, I think we'll have to have the two brothers so they can have this male-male dynamic, and then we have the two sisters have the girl-girl dynamic, and then we can have the male-female dynamic going on, brothers sisters. But the whole thing has to harmonize in this sort of symmetrical foursome, shall we say. But one of the consequences of that is that, okay, so you've done that sort of makes sense artistically, but what are you going to do with the characters? Now, Peter's the eldest, he becomes the High King. Edmund is the Judas Iscariot traitor figure, and the penitent. Lucy's the one who has the light of faith, the light of grace, the innocence. Susan. So yes, I think that she's the older sister. She sort of plays her role, but she's almost going through the motions. She doesn't seem to have a major role to play, and it's true actually in all the stories. And ironically, the most controversial role she plays is when she doesn't appear at all in the last battle, Philip Pullman, the atheist children's story writer, accused Lewis of hating women because he sent Susan to hell because just for the sin of liking boys. Now that's, and I know we're jumping ahead now to the last battle, which we haven't got to, but I think if you're talking about Susan, this is important because Lewis did not send Susan to hell. What he did was she did not go to heaven when the other children did. She's still on earth, right? Anything could happen to Susan. She could certainly get to heaven when her time came. But at this particular moment, she's more interested in stockings, fashion, parties, and boys than about the deeper things. In other words, she thinks that faith, she thinks that innocence, she thinks that the whole religious thing is for kids. Right, and the ironic thing is that that's childish. No, she basically, the point is actually made in the last battle that she couldn't wait to get to the most silly age, adolescence, in a person's development. She couldn't wait to get there, and then once she got there, she doesn't want to go anywhere else. In other words, it's stunted development, and of course, if she does stay there, she probably won't get to heaven. It'll be her own fault. But certainly that's where she is at the moment in the story where the other children are killed. She's not killed for starters. She can't go to heaven unless she get killed. So so she's still alive and she has issues. So that's very, very different from sending her to hell for liking boys. It's not because she likes boys, it's because she's a kid. Let me make this perfectly clear. Let's put it this way. Let's put it in theological terms. An apparent contradiction, in other words, a paradox. Jesus Christ says, unless we become like little children, we cannot enter the kingdom of heaven. St. Paul says, when I was a child, I behaved like a child, but now I'm no longer a child, I put away childish things. So is St. Paul contradicting Christ, which would make him a heretic? Evidently and obviously not, right? Especially as we're recording this on the feast of St. Peter and St. Paul. But clearly, when St. Paul talks about childishness, it doesn't mean the same thing that Christ means when Christ talks about childlikeness. So we have to remain like little children in the sense that we have to have that primal innocence that gives us that gets us back up again. I know we're getting deep here, but this is very important. So Thomas Aquinas says basically the perception of reality begins with virtue. You can't perceive reality unless you have virtue. The specific virtue is the greatest. I'm not going to go off on that tangent. Love and humility are the same thing ultimately, and you take my word for it because otherwise we'll go off on another tangent. But the first and the worst of sins is pride. The antidote to that first and worst of sins is humility. Humility, says St. Thomas, gives us a sense of gratitude. It's the sense of gratitude that opens the eyes in wonder. And it's only when the eyes are open in wonder that we can move to contemplation. It's only when we move to contemplation that our minds and hearts are dilated, dilatatio, dilated in the fullness of the real. Okay, so this is a Thomistic understanding of how we encounter reality. Fivefold, five senses, if you like, of encountering reality: humility, gratitude, wonder, contemplation, contemplatio, and dilatatio, dilation. So that's to be childlike is to have that humility, which leads to gratitude, wonder, contemplation, dilation. To be childish is to refuse to grow up. To be childish is to basically say, I want to just do my own thing. I want to be myself. I want to go to parties. I want to follow the latest fashion. I want to basically be seduced by the zeitgeist, not the Heiligergeist, by the spirit of the age, and not the Holy Spirit. So that's where Susan is. She's childish, not childlike. Lucy is childlike. Susan is childish. But this is, of course, only refers to the last battle and not to Susan in the line which wardrobe we went off on a tangent.
Yeah. No, I would, my simplistic way of saying why she, or what happens to her, is that she gets distracted. And also, I can't imagine she'd be the same after the death of her family. Like that, I bet she would be way less distracted right after that. That's a pretty massive event to not even really consider, and how that would, affect Susan in the future.
Which is why well, we could many examples of this from intertextually from literature, but why Zeus in the Odyssey says that that mortals blame us gods for suffering, whereas in fact it's their own recklessness that causes the suffering, except for that which is given. In other words, some suffering is given in order to bring us to our senses, as Oscar Wilde says, how else but through a broken heart may Lord Christ enter in. That's perhaps, yes, indeed, perhaps Susan's heart needs to be broken by the death of her siblings and her family for her to actually break out of that childish bubble in which she finds herself. Of course, I know of at least one piece of fan fiction where someone's actually written a novel about Susan, back on Earth and growing up, and how she ends. Of course, it's all speculative because it happens off stage as regards Narnia.
Sure. Is it a good bit of
I haven't
work,
read
or
it.
no? Oh, you haven't read it.
I,
Okay.
I met the author at the C.S. Lewis conference, and I thought about buying the book and I didn't, so I haven't read it.
Okay. Well, that it's good to know that book exists, and maybe it's good, maybe it's not. But sort of one of the things I think that she sort of has her role to play, sort of in the Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe, is just accompanying Lucy with Aslan on his passion, which the women in the Bible do very well.
Yeah, and obviously that analogy is deliberate, that it's the women who are, if you like, the most intimate partakers of the Lord's passion, apart from the Lord himself. So that again, Lewis is very aware of analogizing other texts, and of course the most important other text is scripture.
Yeah, except for maybe Saint John, right?
Well, yeah, yes. St. John is the one disciple who stands by our Lord during his passion, but he's outnumbered by the women.
Oh yeah, definitely. No, it's sort of, but so yeah. Anyway, so Lucy and Susan play sort of that role, and I feel like that is one of just the most moving parts of the book, is sort of experiencing the passion almost more from a different type of literature. Anyways, like the Bible just doesn't give sort of those details because, I mean, it can't, kind of, or well, it's a completely different type of literature than that was more literature for that time period, sort of the way it was written versus how we think of stories and novels today. It's very detailed in the mind and stuff like that, and that wouldn't be able to be done in the Bible.
I think you have to remember the Bible, first of all, is divinely inspired. It's
Well,
a
yes.
whole different ball game, and in some sense, we could talk about it being a distillation. In other words, that what's in there, particularly in the gospel, especially in the gospel, is the distilled presence of Christ. There's not going to be anything extraneous. There's not going to be anything that sort of could be open to easy misinterpretation. This is exactly the distilled essence. This is a gin drinking here, right? This is the distilled essence of the good news. It's not a storytelling. It's not embellished with extra facts. It's not going off on tangents. There aren't subplots, right? It's a distillation. It's a work of not just genius. It's a work of divinity.
Yeah, it's not this podcast episode.
No, Deo gracias. As good as this is.
No, yeah, of course. No, I just, going off on tangents, it's a very much, novels very much are a different thing. And
I mean,
Deo gracias,
human.
indeed.
It's human to converse, and if we are conversing, it's also inevitable we're going to go off on tangents.
Yeah.
And in some sense, a novel is a literary conversation. So, it's going to go off in other places. Of course, if it's a good novelist, it's not going to go off in other places for no purpose. It's going to go off in other places to bring the deeper purpose more to light. But nonetheless, that's part of what the multifaceted, multi-layered aspect of novel writing is, which is very, very different in essence from scripture.
Yeah. I really like in the part, or at at the end, after Aslan's death and passion, and his version of a crucifixion, the mice are the ones that come together and free him of his ropes and shackles, so to speak.
Yes. The exaltation of the humble, right? The
Mhm.
exaltation of the humble. It's the mice who free the lion. It's the smallest who are greatest in the kingdom of God. Reepicheep, in the later stories, there's another perfect example of this. It's very appropriate that Lewis should employ a humble creature to do the great deeds of humility.
Yeah, that was the gift to the mice, was sort of Reapy Jeep in a sense. The sort of gift in response to their freeing Aslan is this wonderful noble night mouse.
Yes, absolutely. I agree. And he, of course, one of the most, well, I say one of the most wonderful characters that Lewis created, but I would actually say sub-created. I would even say that's one of the greatest characters sub-created in literature. VP Chief is extremely memorable.
Yeah.
And
Well, this has been an absolutely wonderful conversation, Joseph. Thank you again for coming on. Is there a book that you'd like, or something you'd like to send the audience towards to support your work?
well, in light of this conversation, I would suggest they take a look at my book, Further Up and Further In, Understanding Narnia. And that's published by Tan Books, so I think tanbooks.com. And I would also recommend they visit my own personal website to find out what I'm up to. I post 3 new podcasts every week on my own website, in the sanctum of that website, and everything I publish and everything I do, such as this. If you send me the link, I will post this on my own website. So my own website is jpearce.co, jpearce.co.
We'll have all that in the description of this video, so people can just click the link and head towards your stuff. But again, thank you for coming on. Lovely talking to you. Looking forward to my favorite of the Narnia books for the next one, The Horse and His Boy. Definitely my favorite. I know you. It's one of your least favorite books. Is that correct?
The first shall be last and last shall be first. It was my least favorite, but it's actually it's ascending through the ranks. I don't know where I put it now. It certainly is not my least favorite now. I've grown very fond of it.
Okay. Well, yeah. So thank you again, and please like, share, and subscribe this to the channel, and please like, share, and comment on this video to spread it around. And thank you everyone for watching. Have a wonderful day.